What is up there, YouTube? This is J-Man Time, and today I have a video on a rare experimental rifle from the interwar era that could have helped a country that was in the middle of a civil war. Now, this weapon system here was an experimental semi-automatic rifle that was basically the Spanish equivalent of the American M1 Garand. And that weapon system here could have, in an alternate timeline, have altered the course of the war in Spain. Yes, the weapon system in this video today is a semi-automatic rifle that, if it had been mass-produced, it could have changed the history of the Spanish Civil War. And that weapon system is the Arellano Model 1932 experimental semi-automatic rifle that was developed in Republican Spain, also known as the Second Spanish Republic, between the years of 1932 and 1936, a weapon system that was meant to replace all of the older bolt-action rifles that were still in service with the Spanish Army post the revolution that led to the creation of the left-wing Spanish Republican government, also known as the Second Spanish Republic to most outsiders. Now, the rifle I'm talking about is the Arellano Model 1932, also known in Spanish as the Fusil Automático System MR Model 1932, which was a rare experimental rifle that was developed by the Spanish Fábrica Nacional de Armas de Oviedo, or the Spanish National Arms Manufacturing Plant, based in the city of Oviedo in the year of 1932. This experimental semi-automatic rifle was designed by two men by the name of Marianas and Ramirez de Alano. And these two brothers worked for the Spanish Fábrica de Nacional Arms Manufacturing Plant in the city of Oviedo, and had developed this experimental semi-automatic rifle first as a substitute for the bolt-action Spanish Model 1893 rifles that were still standard issued for the Spanish Republican Army in the year of 1931-1932, and as a potential replacement for all infantry rifles that were currently in service with the Spanish Armed Forces at the time. The weapon system here was chambered for the standard 7x57mm Mauser cartridge, the same rifle cartridge used in the Model 1893 Spanish Mauser, and it used a gas-operated gas trap rotating bolt system that was basically the Spanish equivalent or a Spanish copy of the Danish Bang system from 1909. The Bang rifle was an experimental semi-automatic rifle developed by Søren Bang, a Danish arms inventor or a Danish gun designer, in the year of 1909, and was one of the many Danish experimental rifles that were tested in the 1910s and 20s as a potential replacement for the bolt-action rifles being used by the Danish armed forces. Well, it seems that the Spanish had copied this system, or at least were influenced by this system, in the early 1930s, and this weapon system here, the Arellano Model 1932, also known as the Sistema MR Model 1932, is one of the offshoots or weapons that were influenced by the Bang rifle to be tested in the early 1930s. This weapon system was also fed by a 10-round box magazine that was reloaded via stripper clips. The weapon overall weighed 9.4 pounds, or 4.3 kilograms, and had a maximum targeting range or effective firing range of 2,000 to 2,200 meters or 2,200 yards. Now, this weapon system here was tested between the years of 1932 and 1936, but ultimately it was rejected, mostly by the old guard who were still in power within the Spanish military at the time, even though this was the newly formed left-wing Spanish government, the Second Spanish Republican government, that had come to power only a year earlier in the year of 1931. They believed that the older bolt-action rifles, like the Model 1893 Spanish Mauser, was good enough, and they also felt that the younger generation of soldiers would waste ammunition if they were given a semi-automatic weapon system, like this weapon system here. So as a result, the weapon system was rejected, even though it was considered a very good weapon and passed most of the tests or trials that it was put through in the year of 1932, in the years of 1932 through 1936. Ironically enough, in the same year of 1936, just after this weapon system was rejected, you would have the start of the Spanish Civil War, a civil war between the right-wing nationalist forces led by Francisco Franco versus the left-wing Spanish government, or the government of the Second Spanish Republic, the government of the left-wing Second Spanish Republic led by Manuel Azana and Juan Negrin. Now, during the Spanish Civil War, the Spanish government, or the recognized government, the Second Spanish Republican government, largely lost its conflict due to a lack of modern infantry weapons. The Spanish nationalists that they were fighting against received a ton of newer equipment from Germany and Italy, who at first were secretly supplying Franco's forces with advanced infantry weapons, aircraft, and anti-aircraft weapon systems, but later were openly supporting the Spanish nationalist faction during the war, especially once Franco began to gain ground and many of the Spanish Republican bases fell into nationalist hands. If the Spanish Republican forces had adopted a semi-automatic rifle as early as 1932 and 1933, they could have had an advanced infantry rifle that was on par with the American M1 Garand or the Soviet SVT-40 in terms of its rate of fire and its semi-automatic function. The only problem I have with this rifle is that it used the Bang system. Anyone who has studied the history of the Danish Bang system, Danish gas trap system, also known as the Bang system, knows that this system did have some flaws, mainly with overheating, and in some cases the system caused the rifle to break or some of the rifle components to crack under the strain of the recoil action. You saw this with many German experimental rifles that used the Bang system, like the Gewehr 41, for example, a German semi-automatic rifle adopted in 1941, but was later replaced by the Gewehr 43, which still used a version of the Bang system, but a more refined version. Now, I'm not 100% sure if this Spanish version of the Bang system was fully refined, but if it managed to pass most of its trial tests, then it must have been good enough to where the weapon system would function under normal combat conditions, like the Gewehr 43, which was an upgrade to the Gewehr 41. But those are just my personal opinions on what could have been, but ultimately the Second Spanish Republic's military decided not to adopt a semi-automatic rifle and would maintain use of their older Model 1893 Spanish Mauser rifles until they were ultimately defeated at the end of the Spanish Civil War in 1939. But what do you think of this weapon system? Please tell me in the comment section below. The Arellano Model 1932 semi-automatic rifle system, a Spanish semi-automatic weapon that was kind of ahead of its time. It was actually before the American M1 Garand, which wasn't adopted until 1934, and the Soviet SVT-40, as I mentioned earlier, which wasn't adopted until the late 1930s, early 1940s, and even the German Gewehr 41-43, with two rifles that were not adopted until after the start of World War II. So what do you all think of this weapon system? Please tell me in the comment section below. And do you think this weapon system could have affected the course of the Spanish Civil War if it had become a standard issued weapon with the Spanish Republican Army during this conflict between 1936 and 1939? Please tell me in the comment section below, and until next time, this was J-Man Time, signing off.